Fans of the Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40,000, thank you very much for joining me for the latest 8th edition Warhammer 40,000 Newsflash, and today's date is the 10th of May 2017. We are going to go for another double hitter in this particular video. I'm combining yesterday's post on characters with today's post on faction focus, Imperial Guard. Maximum troll points to GW's legal department, and I'm rolling them into one because there kind of wasn't enough in each one to do a topic on, plus, well, there's some other reasons which we're going to get onto. Long-time subscriber, commenter and occasional agent provocateur Rob McCord rightly observed that the corner eagles that I had added at great expense to the last bulletin's Newsflash whiteboard looked a little skeletal. I have to admit, I agreed with this, and to avoid being accused of either being an undead sympathiser, a chaos worshipper, or have PETA come after me for starving my eagles, I've fattened them up with some extra mice from the experimentation lab today. So they're looking quite healthy, although after I drew them out, all the ink bled and kind of lost all the details, so I then had to go with a biro. This took a long time, so I hope you appreciate it, to draw the detail back in. So actually, despite that little whoopsie, they've actually ended up looking quite cool. Now on the graphics front, shh, don't tell anybody, but I stole some paper from Mrs. Leakycheese for this update. Can you see this nice shiny grey paper? Let's go for a close-up. You see the delicious texture on that? Yeah, well, I actually stole this from Mrs. Leakycheese's art cupboard. So whatever you do, don't mention the paper. I hope you like the look of it though. It just goes to show the lengths I will go to give you guys the very best in bespoke, luxury, artisan, handcrafted graphic updates. So let's dive into what we learned in these two recent posts. The first article was about characters, which I've chosen to name You're On Your Own, Mate, and that is because the first and possibly most significant change here is that independent characters can no longer join units. So independent characters are now on their own, no more meat shielding. However, to maintain the heroic nature of the game, characters will now get proximity bonuses, i.e. when allied or troops on their side are within a certain distance of them, they might get certain benefits. So if you look at the article, which I'll leave links to in the description, there are a few examples given. This reminds me a little bit of how apothecaries work in the Blood Angel army at the moment, I think. Got like a 6-inch radius effect for the feel no pain benefit. I think it's going to be a bit like that. Characters being on their own are clearly going to, like, with the new rules on firing, they sound super vulnerable. However, there seems to be a blanket rule which says you can't fire on a character unless they are now the closest target. I don't think you will have to shoot at the closest target, but you can only shoot a character if they are the closest target. Now we'll come back to that when we get onto the Imperial Guard bit. Now, having looked at these three, this did make me think that the Rebute Guilliman character from Gathering Storm 3, Rise of a Primarch, it made me actually think that his stats were a prototype or even compliant with the 8th edition approach, because he's a monstrous creature at the moment, so he can't join a unit. However, he does have bonuses that affect troops that are within a certain distance of him. He's going to transition, he's going to slide into the new edition very smoothly, because I think they've written his rules, so he's essentially compliant straight off the bat. So interesting that. And then the final thing on heroes is they will be able to perform what are called heroic interventions, where basically they can hop into a melee and they haven't charged, but when other friendly units nearby are engaged in melee, there's going to be some rule which allows them to jump into that. Now, I don't know, if they're going to call this heroic interventions, I don't know what Vanguard veterans are now going to do as their special ability. Perhaps they're going to be called heroic orbital interventions. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. They just need to name these rules. Characters. What do I think about characters? Ooh. I don't know. I'm not sure on this one. It's an interesting change, and I can see pros and cons of the approach. I guess it's going to stop meat shielding. It's going to stop certain types of death starring. If we applied this to Horus Heresy, people who fight Mechanicum will love the fact that you will no longer be able to hide someone like Anacaris Scoria in a bunch of Castellax, which has led to many documented incidents of nerd rage. Yeah, perhaps from that point of view, it's a good thing. I think it fits with the generally more flexible style of gameplay and the less prescriptive meta that is developing for 8th. I also hope, although they didn't mention in this, I also hope this means we've seen the end of challenges, which is a mechanic that I never liked. It's just like, what? You're a technological force. It's like, what's all this rubbish with challenges? I know it's heroic, but it just gave too much power to the challenger, I always thought, and there were many abuses of that particular tactic for pulling enemy characters into combats that they had no chance of winning. You know, why don't they get protected by their chums if there's a clearly more deadly enemy there? One thing I do like as well is that characters are going to be kind of like, they're going to be more fluid, so they can kind of move around from parts of the battlefield to other parts of the battlefield much more easily. I don't think they're going to get, I hope they're not going to get pinned in challenges, because I think that's a bit of a daft thing. And if you're going to allow troops to fall back from combat, then you need to allow the characters to do so. Otherwise, you might just find you have a fall back tactic, like a rollback defense tactic. But if your hero's on the line with his troops, he's just going to get left out in no man's land and hacked to pieces. So hopefully that'll carry through. So that's characters. Now let's move on to the second post, which was called Faction Focus, and it was about the Imperial Guard, or whatever they choose to call it this day for copyright reasons. But it's the Imperial Guard, let's be clear on that. Right, so I'm not interested in the actual fluff around the Imperial Guard here, but there were a number of bits of information that were fed in which relate to rules in 8th edition. So I have pulled those out as examples of what 8th is going to give us. So firstly, it was noted that commissars will have a mitigating effect on failed morale checks. So this is the first indication that we've seen that there is going to be some way of having troops or perhaps banners that reduce the severity of a failed morale check. So I don't know, maybe it is like he halves the number of casualties taken. Maybe they allow you to ignore the effect of the first 3 casualties on your morale check. I don't know. But it's good to hear that that mechanic's going to be in there. Rattling snipers were mentioned, and they alluded to the fact that they will have a precision shot style ability and be able to pick out our characters. Remember I said about, I'll come back to this, can't be fired upon unless they're the closest target. Well, you're going to have specialist troopers who can pick out and shoot upon characters. So that's good, and it's good to see a counter tactic to this mechanic. You know, and that's what snipers do. It's a realistic representation of one of their battlefield functions. You know, the other obvious thing is anti-material purposes, i.e., you know, plinking at tanks and armoured vehicles. The third point of interest in the faction focus was around the Leakymail battle tank, and we were given its defensive stat line. And it was stated to be toughness 8, have a 3+ saving throw and 12 wounds. This was interesting because I'd been speculating as to what the likely conversion rate was on hull points to wounds. Now, if we assume a standard Leakymail and none of the special variants from Heresy, the assault variants, that's got 3 hull points. So this conversion factor is a bit more favourable to what I had thought about before, which was 1 to 3. Well, this is actually 1 to 4 hull points. That's our 4th example now, the vehicle of some type in 8th edition. Maybe they've decided that armoured vehicles need to be tougher overall, because all of the bigger vehicles, the Leakymail, the Gorkanaut and the Imperial Knight, all have a conversion rate on the hull points more favourable than 1 to 3. I think the Leakymail has been the most favourable so far, whereas the Dreadnought is the least favourable, which was slightly under 1 to 3 because I had 8 wounds. So yeah, anyway, I'll keep feeding these stats in as they release them. And then finally, okay, I tell a lie, this is the only Imperial Guard specific thing. They noted that Guard don't have to test anymore to use orders. They stated that rapid fire weapons will get 4 shots up to half range and 2 shots up to full range. So essentially they're keeping the same sort of fire mechanics on rapid fire weapons, at least as they had in 7. So unfortunately that sounds like we've still got buckets of dice to deal with. Bit less keen on that. Perhaps it's okay to keep buckets of dice if the rest of the rules are streamlined and made quicker to play. You know, perhaps we can still live with lots of dice. So yes, we'll see about that. An interesting bunch of changes. I hope you've enjoyed this latest news flash on the ever-evolving 8th edition. Leave your comments, suggestions, graphical praise down in the comments section as always. I look forward to bringing you the next one. thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.